I thought Kohberger wanted the show. I thought he wanted the trial. I thought he wanted the fame, the attention, and now he's just going to kind of fade away.
Bryan Kohberger accepting a plea offer from the state of Idaho to avoid the death penalty.
He already got the recognition he wanted. I think he wanted the world to see the monster he became, and he got that. You send your daughter off to college, and she comes back to you in a box. No parent should have to go through this. Will it be something brief? Will it be detailed? Will he be making it up? We don't know. We won't have that investigative urgency.
I think people want this guy to not be around anymore. How safe is he going to be in prison?
Why did he choose that house? Why did he choose those 4 children? What was he trying to do? What was he trying to accomplish?
On June 30th, Bryan Kohberger, the creepy killer who brutally murdered 4 college students in Moscow, Idaho, took a plea deal. No trial, no cross-examination, no closure. No chance for the victims' families to stare that creep down on the witness stand. But behind that storm of emotion is a whole lot of unanswered questions. The parents of the victims, they didn't just want justice, they wanted Kohberger put to death. And that is what we are talking about with the #1 authority on the Idaho killings and Bryan Kohberger right here on Tom Zenner's Scandal. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. Cato's going to check in from the Midwest, but this story popped so quickly that we had to do this while Cato was on the road. And I called the guy that we had on our episode last September, who is the top person to talk to. Howard Blum, New York Times, Airmail. He wrote the best-selling book on the Kohberger case, on the Idaho killings, and we are going to break it all down. Every element about the parents' reaction. What about the executions in Idaho? Do they ever happen? What other evidence has been unearthed that Howard knows about that we haven't heard yet? It's all coming up right now on this episode of Tom Zenner Scandal. All right, joining us, Howard Blum from the Hamptons, the #1 authority on the Idaho murder case, Bryan Kohberger, the families, everything about this. Busy week for Howard, no doubt. You've seen him all over CNN, Inside Edition. He's on all the shows, and we're lucky to have him now for the second time. Now, Howard, thanks so much for jumping in here. It was a few days ago when this news came down. You're so heavily involved in this story, Howard. Did you have an inkling this was happening, and how shocked were you when you got the news?
I was taken completely by surprise. In the days leading up to this decision, the Kohberger team had lost a major motion. They had tried to confront the state, the prosecution, with the fact that there would be alternate perpetrators, that other people could have been involved in this killing. The judge looked at the evidence that they had, and he said, pure speculation. This won't fly. You can't bring this into the courtroom. You can't impugn 4 people just based on innuendo and rumors. Once that happened, the Kohberger team went back to their client and they said, look, you're facing a death penalty. You got to do some hard thinking. And then they put some pressure on him to do this hard thinking. And then they go back to the prosecution. And what was so surprising to me was at this point, the prosecution decided, yeah, let's make a deal. After 2.5 years, after all the time, after working with the families involved, that they could be that pragmatic, that cynical to say, we're not going to roll the dice. We're not going to go into the courtroom. They had what to me seemed like an open and shut case, but they just didn't.
Okay, so there's so much we're going to get into. And Howard, you are the guy. When Night Comes Falling, your best-selling book, which ironically, coincidentally, luckily came out in paperback version at the beginning of this week with a new afterword. So we're going to talk about that. But you've been in Idaho, Moscow, Idaho, many times. You're probably the #1 guy to talk to about this case. And we're going to talk about the parents' reaction, which was extremely visceral. I mean, they were pissed off that there wouldn't be a death penalty option for Bryan Kohberger. I've got some opinions on that. I want to talk to you about that. The state of Idaho and their history of executions. We need to dive deep into that if he actually ever would have been put to death. So we're going to discuss that deeply. But Howard, here's one thing that I was shocked by. I thought Kohberger wanted the show. I thought he wanted the trial. I thought he wanted the fame, the attention. I thought that was part of his motive going into this. And that's one of the things that really shocks me is that this creep is so afraid of dying potentially, which may or may not have even happened, that he gave up that to be this spectacle. And now he's just going to kind of fade away.
I think you raise a good point, but I think he just wasn't afraid of dying. I just think it was more than facing the firing squad. From the reporting that I've been doing in the aftermath of this decision to have a plea bargain, here's what I found out. Kohberger's lawyers told him, you know what's going to happen if this case goes to trial? Your mother is going to have to go on the stand. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, after the murders, just 2 hours or 3 hours afterwards, he made an hour call to her. What was said on that call? Did he imply anything about the murders? She was going to have to discuss that on the stand, under oath, under cross-examination by the state. Also, as I write in my book, I describe in great detail the trip that Kohberger takes across country with his father as he leaves Washington State University for Christmas break just about 3 weeks after the murders. And they're sitting shoulder to shoulder in a white Hyundai Elantra. The whole world is looking for a white Hyundai Elantra. The father knows that his son lives 10 miles away from the murders, where the murders occurred. He knows his son is problematic, former heroin addict, had emotional problems. And he was so concerned enough about his son to come out there to see him and make this cross-country trip. And during the course of this journey, the father must have had some inclination that something was wrong. Was he able to confront it? Was he able to deal with the fact that perhaps my son is a monster? Or was he able to just push it to the back of his mind? He too would have been put on the stand, put under the scrutiny of the state's examination. And the son was told, do you want to expose your parents to this? And he made the decision that, let me cut my losses. He already got the recognition he wanted. I mean, I think his largest fear was that he'd have done these murders and no one would have ever known that he was responsible for it. I think he wanted the world to see the monster he became, that he found the will to commit this sort of horrible act in his logic, that he somehow could do this.
His twisted logic, that. Right. Mm-hmm.
And now, yes, very much so. And now the state, out of their pragmatic logic, has agreed to say, okay, we'll cut a deal with you. And now his parents don't have to testify. Now he can go off to prison, and now he doesn't have to face the firing squad. It was a very cynical deal.
Yep, and we'll get into some of the details of this plea. But, the ironic thing is he's clearly a monster. He, no doubt about it, he is the killer, this savage killer. But at the end, he wanted to commit the perfect crime too. And two mistakes then, talking to his mom and riding across country with his dad. And so this monster actually has enough soul or conscience to not drag the rest of his family into it. And you think that's the primary reason that he took this plea?
I think it was. I think, before, but his biggest mistake was, would they ever have caught him? Would they ever have gotten any idea who was responsible for this murder if he had not left that knife sheath behind? And now the question is, was the knife sheath left by accident when he was involved in killing two girls in a tiny bedroom and they were fighting back literally for their lives? Or did he leave it as a calling card? We'll never know the whole story. We'll never know where the knife is. Kohberger has to, plead guilty. He has to make some sort of statement to the families, but we'll never get into the real details, and we'll never know with any sense of authority or credibility if what he's saying is the truth at this point.
Hey, Howard, one of the things that we talked about with you the last time you were on the show, and that's out there a little bit, is the strength of the case. And, what happened on that drive? What happened? Was that the right car? Was some evidence contaminated or achieved in erroneous ways? And then he's got the attorney, Ann Taylor, who, was a public defendant, but a good one from all accounts. And they just packed it in. So did they think they had no chance of winning?
I think Ann Taylor realized that not only was she going to lose, but her client was going to face a firing squad. In Idaho, the death penalty law has been passed. It was passed specifically for Bryan Kohberger, that you have to face a firing squad. That's the primary means of execution now, as of next June, actually. And that's what she did not want to send her client to that. Could she have created reasonable doubt in the minds of jurors, all she needed was one person to say, well, I'm not so sure about this. I don't want to send a man to the firing squad based on my doubts, my suspicions. She didn't want to roll the dice with his life being on the line. At the same time, I think the state made that same sort of calculus. They didn't want to roll the dice whether he might get off. They would have put in all this time, all this effort, all this responsibility towards the families, but they just weren't brave enough. I think they were too cynical. I think they got out too early. I think their case would have been very,
it's
very
crazy
effective.
to me that there's all this concern about Bryan Kohberger's life now. And would he have been executed or wouldn't he? And what is the firing squad so much worse than lethal injection? They botched their last lethal injection, and that's the reason why they passed a law to make the firing squad the way for execution in Idaho. There's been 3 in the last 50 years in Idaho. Plus, this case would have had a state appeal, a federal appeal. This thing could have dragged on for decades. I am just blown away that his life just mattered so much to both sides, really, because if I was a parent, I'd be cool that I finally got some closure. Now, I hope I'm never in that situation, and I cannot speak for that family or any of those families. But their reaction to this was incredible to me because I just figured they wanted to know for a fact who did this, and he would be locked up forever. But what you've met these parents, you've covered them. What was your reaction to how intense it was and how upset they were at this plea deal?
I mean, the Goncalves family is furious. Steve Goncalves, and I've had run-ins with him. We don't always necessarily get along, but my heart goes out to him. I mean, this was a man who said after the murders, you send your daughter off to college and she comes back to you in a box. You know, no parent should have to go through this. That was part of the reasons why I got involved in this case, why I first was interested. I sent 3 kids off to college. I worried about it. And he refused to let law enforcement handle things. He became his own sort of detective. He was going to get to the bottom of things. He became a character out of literature, Captain Ahab, who was obsessed with this white whale of finding what really, really happened. And then when he finally gets what he feels is the right man, when he's gone off, he's hired private investigators. He's criticized law enforcement for their investigations. He finally gets to the point where the trial is just going to start within a matter of weeks. Well, they pull the box he's standing on out from under him. He falls to the ground in effect, and they say, too bad, we're cutting a plea deal. And they don't really even consult with him. He gets an email telling him that the deal is done, that it's a fait accompli. And his victimization, his family's victimization continues and continues and continues. Ultimately, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, this will still be a story, a tragedy about victims who survived, families who have to live with this memory, a town that lives with this memory, a university that lives with this memory.
Where does the responsibility lie? Is it solely on the prosecution in the state or the county? Because they want to convict this man. They want to put him behind bars. That's the idea. It's not like the ultimate goal to always put someone to death. First, you got to convict him. So how much say should the family have? I know they didn't have a lot, but is this abnormal where they didn't consult with the family? Plus, you have 4 families, so you have to get a consensus or something. But ultimately, the goal is to lock this creep up forever.
Well, the goal is to get some sort of justice within the law. The goal is to be faithful to the law. And I think part of the problem was that the families were in disagreement. The Chapin family, I think, supports a plea deal. Xana Kernodle and Kaylee's parents are against it. And also because the Goncalves family has from the beginning been so elbows out, so antagonistic to law enforcement, to the prosecutors, to criticizing them at every turn. I think they said, well, we don't want to have to deal with them, basically. We'll just make what we think is right. However, what disturbs me as a citizen, the reason that government exists is supposed to protect the individuals. The people, that's why states came into being, to protect the individuals. I don't think that the state did the right thing for the victims and for their families. They did have a responsibility to them to take this further, especially after they spent 2.5 years and how many millions of dollars building their case. And they built a really firm case, a really convincing case, enough so that the Kohberger team was figuring that they were going to lose.
Yeah.
And I believe that the prosecution should have had the nerve, the will, and the responsibility to the citizens of Idaho to take this forward.
Howard, the thing is, a lot of emotion, obviously, when these parents got the news about the plea, but man, to have to live through a trial too, because this would have been going on for months and then replayed on the news at night and in the paper in the morning and online and everything, and having to hear about the crime again and again and see the crime scene photos. I know they've probably come to grips with how horrific it is, or it was as a parent, but man, part of me is thinking, man, at least you don't have to go through with that. And I know the families were a little bit divided. Maybe some felt that, we've had enough. We want to move on somehow. Is that the sense that you got?
Well, they were divided, but the reality is these families are never going to move on. These families are victims as much as their children. Their lives are ruined. Maybe they will live longer, but their lives will be a shell of what they once were. There'll be a before and after in their lives, and the before is everything that happened before November 13th, 2022, and after is everything that's happened since that date. These are different people, and I think it all comes back to what is the responsibility of the state. What is the responsibility of the state, not just to these families, but to all the citizens of Idaho, to take this case to trial, to try to get to the bottom of things, to find out what really happened. Now, Kohberger will have to say to some extent what happened. I imagine the judge will demand that. But will it be something brief? Will it be detailed? Will he be making it up? We don't know. It won't be under the process. When it was a matter literally of life and death when the case was trying to be made. We won't have that investigative urgency.
Yeah, I'm sure you dove into the history of capital punishment in Idaho. I did. 3 have been put to death since 1976. Here's what's interesting to me, Howard. The average time from sentencing to execution in the United States is 20 to 25 years. After conviction, that's generally how long it takes. Plus, in Idaho, there's a 44% reversal rate when it comes to execution. And the other thing, too, is their lethal injection botched. They had a problem finding the right amount of drugs that would put someone to death. They incorporated the firing squad because of this, but the appeal process, I think, would have been so painful for that family as well, because those things can literally stretch on for decades. And realistically, what would you pin as far as a timeline if they had convicted him and sought the death penalty and got it? Don't you think it would have taken a really, really long time before it happened?
I agree it would have taken a long time, and I also agree the execution practices in Idaho are barbaric. I mean, last February 2024, Thomas Creech, a 73-year-old guy, was rolled in on a gurney to the execution chamber there. They tried to put a needle in his vein that had the lethal cocktail. They tried this 8 different times. He's lying down there, ready to die, and it doesn't work. They reel him out of there, and they have to take him back to his cell. His lawyer the next day says they're going to file a motion saying that'd be cruel and unusual punishment to try to execute him again. The governor of Idaho, Brad Little, says, not so fast. Bring him back. We want him. Now it's been postponed a bit, but he's still on the schedule to be executed. So, Idaho believes in capital punishment. That's the law. I think Kohberger should have had to face up to that, especially since 2.5 years in there. So much time, so much effort. This case had been built. I think the public needs a sense of closure too.
Howard, there's a real possibility here that Kohberger is going to cash in on this. He's going to have opportunities to write a book, and I'm sure he wants to. How far down the line have you gone on that as far as thinking about that? And where would proceeds go? Because I've already read stories that, there's a very good chance he could write a book, and you think he's the guy that would want to.
Well, I mean, people close to him are already writing books. I mean, from what I've heard, his sister is writing a book. One of his professors is writing at least a chapter in her new book, she said, about him. Will this be expanded? I don't know if in New York there is a son of Sam law, meaning that from the son of Sam case, the convicted criminal can't get profits, but maybe members of his family could get profits, whatever. I think down the line, Kohberger will tell his story in a book. Someone will profit from it, but will it be the real story? We don't know. We've seen, the BTK killer. They've all told their stories. And I think Kohberger, part of the reason why I believe Kohberger was able to make this deal is because he felt he accomplished what he set out to do. And what he set out to do was to get this sense of recognition that I found the will to become a monster, to transform myself. And now that I've done that, well, my punishment will make me complete. My jail sentence will make me complete. And I think at some point he'll want to share his metamorphosis into this new sort of man.
The crazy thing, Howard, is this guy's such a monster. It would be an interesting read if he actually read that. I mean, what could possibly go through someone's mind that wants to commit this crime and brutally murder these 4 beautiful young college kids? It's unbelievable. I mean, this guy...
These are sort of puzzles we won't necessarily get the answers to. All along, we've been looking for why. Why did he do this? What sort of motive? Did he know one of the girls? Did he ever speak to one of the girls? There's no evidence of that. We'll find out what really happened. I've been convinced that Maddie Mogen was his primary target, that he met her in a restaurant in downtown Moscow that had sort of a vegetarian menu, the Mad Greek, and either he saw her and was captivated by her blonde good looks and exuberance, or they had a conversation. No one has ever reported on this conversation, but those sort of details that complete this narrative, that give us an understanding of what happened, that will be denied to us and to the family too. Most importantly, the families will never really understand why their kids were chosen out of all the people in the world, why they sent their kids off to college. And why
when you were on our show last fall, Howard, you talked for about 9 minutes where you laid out in unbelievable detail and specificity of how you think this happened. And it was unbelievable. Go back into our archive. If you're watching this, if you didn't see the episode with Howard on, it was last September. Go find that. Now, no one's probably been more involved in this than you, with all the interviews you've done, all the times you've gone to Idaho, all the stories, and now the book that you've written on it. Have you learned anything new from last fall when we had you on that kind of jumps out there? Because when we were talking back then, there was a chance that maybe, some of this evidence wasn't handled properly, and there was a chance maybe this thing could all fall apart. But now it seems pretty buttoned up. But was there anything out there that you've learned in the last few months that kind of shocked you?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, on the night of the murders, when Kohberger, now we can say Kohberger, enters the house, he enters through a sliding kitchen door. First, he's circling the block 3 different times. During these 3 different cycles, I believe he's trying to find the will to become this monster. He sees the DoorDash driver make a delivery at 4 a.m. Now we know, according to testimony from the DoorDash driver, that she saw him too. She was going to testify to say that she saw Bryan Kohberger there. He goes into the house. He goes up to the 2nd floor. He goes into Maddie Mogen's room. And there he finds not just Maddie, but Kaylee there too. And he kills them too. It's a vicious battle. He leaves his knife sheath behind because of this battle. In the course of, which is new, in the course of this assault on these 2 young women, Zana comes up the stairs and he chases her down. This is something new. And he then catches her and kills her. And then Ethan is awakened. He then kills Ethan. And at some point during the killing of those last 2 victims, Ethan and Zana, he sits down. There's a print of an indentation of his buttocks on a chair in that room. And they know he took a rest, that he was able to take a rest and then to move on. And then he walks out. He then sees Dylan Mortensen. And now Dylan Mortensen, who sees this man in the black mask, and she doesn't speak. She's in a frozen state of shock. The moment's too large for her. Now she won't have to testify about what she saw. She was going to testify that she saw a man of Kohberger's build with bushy eyebrows. That's gone, and he just walks out. So both Dylan and Bethany Funk will not have to testify. They will not have to explain why they waited 8 hours. 8 hours before alerting other people. And during this time, we've also learned they weren't asleep. They had gone, Bethany had gone down to Dylan's room. They were calling people. They called their parents. They were on social media sites. They were on a job site. Why was this really cognitive dissonance in the sense that they couldn't confront what was really happening? It seems remarkably cavalier. Thank God I never was in their situation. I'll never have to be in their situation. I don't want to judge them. But now they will be spared of going on the stand and having to answer this, and having their Dylan's eyewitness testimony about the man with bushy eyebrows being torn apart. So all that is relatively new of how things went down.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And, it's already ruined enough lives. If those people had to testify, who knows? I mean, they would have been facing some serious cross-examination. It would have been pretty rough. You've spent a lot of time in Moscow, Idaho. Moscow is how they pronounce it out there. It's a town of 25,000 people. Yeah, that's right. Costco. They tell you. 25,000 people. The previous murder before this was 5 years ago. They don't have murders there. They don't have serious crimes there. Do you think the city's taking a big sigh of relief that the circus isn't coming to town and they can avoid this trial? Or are they so embedded with the families there that they wanted more closure for them?
Moscow is a pretty complicated little town. It's in its own way, it's sort of like Twin Peaks. I mean, what you have is in one part of the town is a very liberal university. The University of Idaho is ranked as the biggest party school, number one party school in the state. The major church group in this town is sort of a right-wing fundamentalist Christian group that wants to create what they call the American Redoubt. That's their word, which would be sort of a Christian capital of America. They were very anti-vaccination. They've been suing the town. There were death threats on the police before these murders. So the town is really, as one lawyer involved in the case told me when I was interviewing him, the town is at the verge of a civil war, he said. So into this town, which is already full of torment and tumult, becomes 4 murders. I think this town is ripped apart forever. And talk about cynicism. The university decides to get rid of the murder house. It's the university's decision. They were given the house on King Road where the murders occurred. Why did they decide to tear this down? Well, because when visiting families would come with their prospective students to the campus, one of the main tour stops was the murder house. And this didn't set the right impression. So in the zeal to get new students, they tore down this house, thinking it would all go away. But this is not going to go away. This is literally a curse on this town for generation to generation
Howard,
generation.
We've gone to all the major crime scenes in LA, Cato and I, the Wonderland murders, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, OJ. I mean, people are still going to go there even if the house is not there. And yeah, that town's never, ever going to be the same. You've been in the game for a very, very long time. Very, very successful. New York Times. Now what you're doing with Airmail. We'll talk about your new book that you told me about at the beginning, off mic here. I want to talk about it in a second. But how about you? You've had to dig deep into this thing, and you've seen a lot. You've talked to people. You felt the pain of the parents. You know details that other people don't. Has this affected you at all? Because there's a lot of disturbing elements in this thing.
It's been a very personal journey for me. As I said, I'm the father of 3 children. Your heart goes out to the parents. I mean, on one breath, you feel yourself lucky. Thank God this didn't happen to me. And at the same time, it's just hard to deal with what's happened to them. Also, though, there's a lot of antagonism in this town. For someone coming in, a New Yorker like myself, coming in, poking around, it was very difficult to get to the bottom of things. There also was a gag order. That's the other thing we have to see in the weeks ahead. The gag order was introduced not long after Kohberger was arrested. That was 7 weeks after the murders. That meant that the prosecutors, the law enforcement people couldn't talk. I had gotten out there earlier, so I had made some introductions. But now, perhaps the floodgates will open, and now perhaps make a call to a lawyer, make a call to a police officer, and maybe they'll be more candid. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, so they weren't real welcoming to you, the way it sounds, but you had to develop some relationships there with law enforcement, the attorneys, et cetera. Did they soften over time, or are they still real anti about big city folk from New York, writers coming in and doing what they do?
I'll tell you one small story without mentioning names. When I first got out there, I was looking for a place to stay. So I'm driving around the campus area, and I see one motel that says discounts for federal and state employees. So I figured federal and state employees, that means FBI and state troopers. So I check in there, I go down to the bar with my American Express card, and each night, and I'm not saying an FBI agent can be bought for a free beer, but by the third beer, he's becoming a little less antagonistic and a little more.
Well, that's a savvy journalist right there, man. You got to know what you're doing, right? And I bet you got some great information too.
I got some stuff. Yeah. There's still this is a story, the gag order was very tight. As things started leaking, the screws were turned by the federal government. Also, the federal government had things they wanted to cover up. For example, the way they got the DNA in this case. They went to DNA websites, genetic websites that had inventories of people giving in their DNA that they were prohibited from accessing, and yet they accessed them. This was in violation of the terms of the website. If one of the people on that website wanted to sue the federal government or the FBI, they might have a case.
Yep. Yeah, I read all your stories in airmail, and I was really fascinated by, was it the Goncalves? Is that how you pronounce the name? The one family?
The Gonsalves?
Yeah. And he's the guy, almost like a vigilante, turned himself into a detective, essentially. Really get hot on this case, so upset. Very, very outspoken, very pissed off when the plea deal was announced earlier. There's justice sometimes in prison. Do you think you can't think about this without thinking, is there a chance maybe he doesn't survive a long prison term? I mean, it's weird. You can't predict it, but man, this case has so many of these elements and the fury of these parents. And if it were me, man, I'd be finding a way to probably get that guy off in prison. So do you think I'm just saying, who knows? You don't know until you're in that situation. But I think people want this guy to not be around anymore. And I'm wondering, where he'll end up in prison or anything like that. But it's for the amount of emotion that's involved in this thing and the way it ended. A lot of people are thinking that, how safe is he going to be in prison?
Well, I can't predict what's going to happen. All I know is I wouldn't want to be him in the prison population. I imagine he'll be kept in a select unit, but it's going to be very dangerous. I wouldn't want to go beat Bryan Kohberger and go
exactly.
out into the yard.
Let's hope that there's some justice in prison for him. One of the things that happens when you're on death row, even if you're not executed, is you're isolated and you're basically 23 hours a day in a cell. Was that part of what the parents were seeking? That at least if he wasn't going to be executed in the near term, he at least would almost be in solitary confinement. I don't know how they do it in Idaho, or if he'd be in a federal prison, or where he'd be. But when you're on death, row, it's different.
I don't think they were thinking that way. I think they were just thinking in sheer terms of, they wanted this man, this individual, who they believed had murdered their children, to stand in front of a firing squad and have to stare into a half dozen rifles or so and wait for the moment when someone said fire. They wanted him to have that moment. I think that's all they were concerned about. They would say it's justice. I actually believe they wanted vengeance. And I'm a New York liberal. It's hard for me to argue with them in many ways. I'm also a father. It's a very painful situation, and there's something wrong, deeply, deeply wrong about Kohberger walking away just to prison for the rest of his life and not having to just go into a court and say, I did it.
And I have a daughter in college too. College age right now. You can't even begin to fathom what it's been like for those families, and it's just horrible. How does this change your summer? You must have had part of it blocked off where you'd be covering this trial in person, I would imagine.
It does change things a bit. I was going to go out there for a while. I was going to do some more reporting. But as you said, fortunately, I'm doing another book. One of the great things about being a writer I've seen in my career is you can sort of switch topics. And I found a topic that was, hundreds of miles away, in effect, from Moscow, Idaho, and true crime. So it's nice to be immersed in another topic.
Yeah.
I like telling true stories, and I found what I think is a
I know when you tell these types of stories that involve these horrific crimes, like I do, me and Cato do all the time. It's a tough topic to be involved in, but there's such fascination. There's other books out there too. Or maybe it's the sheriff, law enforcement, maybe Ann Taylor, who knows, but there's a lot more stories to be told out there. However, you were being literal when you said this next story that you're working on is hundreds of miles away. I'm fascinated by this, Howard. Congratulations. You're doing the book on the astronauts that were stuck in the space station and were rescued by Elon Musk, right?
Yes, and part of the book is on these two astronauts. Also doing part of the story, too, is the creation of new space, as they call it, which is the commercialization of space. Rather, the future of space exploration and space travel will not be up to governments, but be up to private companies like SpaceX, like Elon is doing. And this case, or this mission of these two astronauts who get stranded up there on a Boeing test flight, they now have to be rescued by SpaceX. And that's how the future that we're all going to be living through is going to unfold. And I've got access to the astronauts. Ron Howard has been involved, and hopefully we're going to make the movie of this. So it's been an interesting story to tell, and I'm trying now to collect the information and try to find a way into
Well, they got the right man to do it. I can't wait to read it. Best of luck. I know you're going to have this thing written hopefully by the end of the year. You're going to get access to these astronauts. There's got to be a lot of things that come out that we don't know. I mean, they were trapped up there for a very, very long time. I can't imagine what was going through their minds, how they survived, how they ate.
Well, just to give you what's really interesting, on the flight up, it was so precarious. At one point, they have to take off their hands off the controls from steering this vehicle that's going at 17,500 miles an hour, trying to reunite with the space station, and they have to reboot it down on the ground. It's like you're turning off their computer. And there's no question, if once they turn it off, will they be able to reboot it? And maybe they'll just be stuck in space forever. The moments like this in the story.
It's a movie.
Really
That's incredible.
Drama.
And Ron Howard's involved, who did the film Apollo 13. So he's got a fascination for this. But I don't know how much you've spoken to the astronauts already. Have you? Have you had multiple conversations?
I've had preliminary conversations.
We'll put this on our calendar for when this book comes out. We'll put a bow on this, Howard, because I know you got a lot going on right now. But anything else, if you want to just write the epilogue to this thing right now, we're going to find out, there's going to be, maybe the families have more reactions and more comments about this. And then we see Kohberger actually going to prison. But anything from someone that's covered, this is going to be 3 years in November when these murders happened. This is 2.5 years ago, a long time. It's involved a great part of your life as well. And you've done great reporting on this thing. Anything you want to do to tie a bow on your coverage of this and just the feelings that you have?
The problem is that you can't really tie a bow on it now because there's so much we don't know. There's so many perplexing mysteries that are still out there. And I hope in the next couple of weeks or months, maybe we'll get some answers. Why? Why did he choose that house? Why did he choose those 4 children? What was he trying to do? What was he trying to accomplish? How did he think he could get away with it? Why was the knife sheath left behind? An accident? Or was it a calling card? And if they had not found that knife sheath, would we still be looking for him?
True.
There's a lot of this story.
Yep. The ride across the country, unbelievable. The phone call with his mother. I didn't even know about that till you mentioned that on this episode. So a lot more that hopefully we're going to learn. All right. When Night Comes Falling, it's in paperback right now. Give it a quick plug. How do we get it? Obviously the normal places, but did you have to, you added something for the paperback version. What's different than that?
I added for the paperback version an afterword, which sort of raises the questions that needed to be confronted at trial. This trial will now never take place. but these are sort of the issues that once people read this, I think will resonate in their minds, and they'll see why it was a mistake for the prosecution to make this deal, because these questions that I raise will never be answered. And I also think, in the book, you'll get a sense of Kohberger and his family in great detail. I don't think that's ever really been done anywhere else that I've read. The sense of this family dynamic, which led to him his making this plea deal. So it should be out there. You can buy it on Amazon, bookstores, airports. It should be
Well, everybody
everywhere.
that follows true crime knows this is the big story, and nobody's done it better. So we're going to put it in our community page. It'll be in the episode notes for this episode. We're going to drive people to buy this book, especially the paperback version with some of the new information. Best of luck on the new one about the astronauts stuck in space, Howard. Congratulations on that. And thank you so much, man. It's always great that we can call you and get you on. You are the number one authority on this case. So thank you. Okay, Howard, thank you so much, Howard Blum in the Hamptons. And I think that is about the best way that we could do this to discuss what happened this week with Bryan Kohberger. Cato and I were planning on going to Idaho for this trial. I think it caught everybody off guard when this was announced, and we're going to have a lot more on this. We'll do multiple episodes on this because there's going to be more fallout. All right, the K train checked in. He's in Milwaukee, heading on his Midwest tour. So go back in our archive and watch the previous episode that we did with Howard. It was last September, and it was amazing. There's moments in there that is just going to give you chills and lays out the timeline and everything from Howard being in Moscow, Idaho. All right, make sure you follow us on social media. We got a lot of great things coming up with the show. We're going to be taking it on the road this summer. Multiple episodes per week are coming. For the one and only K Train, who's bopping around the Midwest right now, I got Zeus back here. Good job, Zeus. Just you and me in here today. I think we held down the fort. I'm Tom Zenner. Thanks so much for watching Tom Zenner Scandal, and we will see you very, very soon.